Hello and welcome back to the Middling Along podcast. I'm delighted to welcome this time journalist Sarah Graham. She's an award-winning freelance health journalist and founder of the Hysterical Women blog. She specialises in health, gender and feminism and has written extensively on these subjects for the newspaper, Refinery 29, the Telegraph, the Guardian, Grazia, the BMJ and many others. Her book, Rebel Bodies, A Guide to the Gender Health Cap Revolution, was published on 5th of January this year. So, just last week. Welcome to the podcast, Sarah, and congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So Rebel Bodies grew out of and weaves in stories from the blog, Hysterical Women, which you started in 2018. Can you talk a little bit about why you launched the blog and at what point did you then decide that you wanted to kind of generate the book as sort of using the stories from the blog?
Absolutely. So I was writing a lot about women's health as a freelance journalist, and I think I had started kind of notice that there were similar patterns, similar themes coming up in all sorts of different things that I was writing about, whether it was endometriosis, whether it was the menopause, whether it was chronic illnesses. And I suppose as a freelancer, because I was writing for different places, I felt like that work was quite spread out. There was a bit over here in this publication, there was a bit over there in that publication. And I sort of wanted a place to bring it all together, really. And so that was how the blog was born. The idea was just to create a space where women could share their own stories, kind of a point proving exercise, really, that actually, you're not alone. This isn't just you. And
It's not a one-off. There's this kind of
exactly,
huge kind of
to sort of bring all of those stories together and say, look, this is a problem, this is a big thing. And I think as a journalist, I've got other friends who are journalists, and we often kind of joke that every journalist has a book in them, and it's always kind of in the back of your mind with any big project, is this sort of leading towards a book? And I think the point for me where I sort of felt like, yeah, actually there is something here where I want to dig deeper and I want to look at this in more depth, was actually through getting involved with the different communities who I speak to and talk about in the book, speaking to women's health activists, menopause activists, campaigners, menstrual health activists and campaigners, all sorts of different people who were using their experiences to push for better. And that was what really inspired me. And because I think a lot has been written in the last few years, or certainly has started to be written in the last few years, about the problem itself. We kind of broadly know that the gender health gap is a thing. And what I wanted to do with the book was to take that one step further and go, okay, but this is what women are doing about it. There is a revolution kind of bubbling away under the surface, and it's starting to pick up momentum. And so I wanted to, celebrate those communities that I felt so inspired by.
You also found out whilst you were writing the book that you were pregnant with your son, who's just turned 1, the same week of your book launch. That was beautifully timed.
It was a very intense week.
How did your own experience of pregnancy, birth, and that sort of postpartum period influence the chapter Baby Blues, which is one of the chapters in the book, and vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, on a practical level, it was just really hard work, because that was the chapter that I was working on at the time, that I found out I was pregnant, which, obviously was very apt. But I just felt, literally sick and tired all day, every day, just absolutely exhausted. So kind of actually just the practical side of getting words on a page was quite tough. I think, the other kind of side of it was it did make me feel quite anxious about what I was going to experience. I think with the type of work I do anyway, I was already very sort of conscious, acutely aware of the things that can go wrong, of the, horrible experiences that some women, some parents do have. So I think it did make me quite determined to sort of fight my case. It made me go into pregnancy very much with my eyes wide open, very clear ideas about what I did and didn't want, very clear ideas about how I wanted to prepare for pregnancy. And I think in a lot of ways that was really positive, because, you know, one of the things I hear a lot is women saying, I had no idea that this could happen, that this was a thing. And so women often are taken completely by surprise by the impact that pregnancy has on their bodies, the impact that labour has on their bodies, the sort of postnatal recovery stuff. So I think in that sense, it was a real double-edged sword. I was very aware of the negatives, but also it helped me to feel really super prepared. And actually, I was really lucky. You know, I went into my first appointment with my community midwife really sort of prepared to fight my case and to stick up for myself. And she was brilliant. She was absolutely fantastic. She was very much, this is your body, your baby, your birth, and we'll do whatever we can to make it, you know, supportive and to support you in your choices and to do what is right for you, which was exactly what I needed. It's what every single person giving birth should have. But obviously I know from my work that it isn't always how it happens. So I was very lucky to have that continuity of care and that really supportive care. And actually my birth experience was very, very positive. My postnatal experience was really positive. I felt really well supported. But yeah, certainly going into it, I had a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, because, you know, I was literally writing a catalogue of birth horror stories at the same time as throwing it.
Yeah, not necessarily recommended for somebody. And it was your first.
Yeah, my first.
Well, I guess for most of us, ignorance is bliss, and we only find out later.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you had a very, very positive
Thank
experience. You share, as you've said, a wide range of stories in the book, in Rebel Bodies. Many of them are shocking, they're harrowing. Some of them are really inspiring in terms of people who've used their own experiences to then campaign for change and for better treatment. Are there any stories in particular that stand out for you? The ones that, when you were writing the book, it's like, I absolutely have to include this one or these two or
Yeah,
three.
absolutely. I mean, the one that for me, I it just felt so important and so heart-wrenching, so kind of harrowing, and that really just sticks out in my mind was the interview that I did with Claire Norton, who you may well remember from reading the book yourself. She had 3 daughters. The second of those daughters died at 8 days old. She had said to the midwife that something was wrong, and she was ignored. Basically, her concerns were not listened to, and her daughter was born breech, not breathing, and subsequently died. And then her third daughter, Merrin Crofts, developed very severe ME as a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
She was completely debilitated by it, and doctors didn't believe Merrin, didn't believe Claire. There was a point where Claire was accused of having fabricated the whole thing, and Merrin very sadly died at the age of 21. She was one of the first people to have ME recorded as the cause of death on her death certificate. And Claire said this one line that has always really stuck with me: death means we believe you now. She compared it to the witch trials.
Well, you use that as the subject, as the chapter heading for that chapter, and it is, as we said, incredibly harrowing. Every parent's worst nightmare, not once but twice, and showing the extent to which, you know, that sort of maternal instinct often gets ridden roughshod over.
Yeah, absolutely. So Claire's story definitely is the one that I must have read this book now a dozen times, kind of in the editing process, and every single time I read those conversations I had with Claire, it makes me cry, you know, because it is such a heart-wrenching story. And then I think the others, you know, I won't kind of go into so many of the specifics, but the other stories that felt really important for me to include were the intersectional ones. So, you know, to have women of colour and their stories and voices and experiences be included, to have trans and non-binary people's stories included, for disabled women's stories to be included, because I think often, you know, a lot of what has been written so far about the gender health gap there might be sort of a nod to those issues, or it's sort of a footnote that, oh yes, and by the way, people with multiple disadvantages are affected differently. But I wanted that to be a really kind of key central thread to the book, because so often it is only the very privileged white middle class women whose stories get heard, like mine and yours. We're the ones that have the voices, that have the platforms. And it was very important to me that the book was properly intersectional, properly inclusive, that it wasn't just a kind of afterthought, but that those stories run all the way through. So they're in every chapter, and it's something that is central to the book. And so that felt really important to me, that those voices were included very much.
I love that. But as you say, it runs all the way through, each chapter of the book. And clearly, it's a very kind of sensitive and thoughtful way of weaving in those experiences. And I have learned a tremendous amount from reading the book. So I'm really very
Thank you.
grateful.
That's really lovely to hear.
As well as the stories being quite shocking, some of the stats that you talk about, I'm a stats nerd, are equally shocking. So if we pull out endometriosis as just one example, you say that it's estimated to cost the UK economy, and I have to kind of read this twice because it seems like such a crazy amount, 8.2 billion a year. Have I got that right?
That sounds right. Yeah, I don't have it in front of me, but it is a staggering amount, and that covers treatment costs, but it also covers the damage to the economy in terms of people not being able to work, people needing time off, that kind of thing. And yeah, I think one of the really infuriating things about this whole issue for me is just the false economy of it all, and it is something that we have very much seen the Tory government, without wanting to get too political, but the Tory government do to the NHS over the last decade. So many examples of where you're making short-term savings, but actually you are storing up such massive problems for yourself in the future by not investing. I think that's one of the things that I'm really clear about in the book, is that we need to invest. We need money to fix this problem. You can't, it can't be all talk. We need the government to put their money where their mouth is. And we saw during COVID, and we're seeing at the moment with the NHS crisis that has hit very hard this winter, that if you don't invest up front, you are just storing up so many problems for the future. We really need to invest in workforce, to invest in resources, to invest in research, so that we're not spending all this unnecessary money on people being really sick further down the line.
Well, not to mention the misery for those people themselves who
Yeah.
might take 10 years to get a diagnosis and be living in tremendous pain for a lot of that time.
No, totally.
And let's also look at the stats, another stat coming up, more stats on heart attacks. So women are up to 3 times more likely than men to die from a heart attack, 50% more likely than men to receive an incorrect initial diagnosis when they're having a heart attack, and 7 times more likely than men to be misdiagnosed and discharged in the middle of a heart attack, which is terrifying. Especially we know that our risks for cardiovascular disease increase sort of post menopause, when we're kind of losing that protection from estrogen. Actually, it's one of the things that I liked again about the book. You talk at the end of each chapter, you've got sort of a little toolkit for kind of how to approach a sort of advocating for yourself or for somebody perhaps in your family, other than being kind of educated and aware ourselves. Are there things, do you think, that we can do from that point of view, if that's something that's affecting us? Although I don't know whether we would have the presence of mind if we were in the middle of a heart attack to be thinking about these things. But I'm a planner. I like to think ahead.
Absolutely. It's a really tricky one, and one of the things that I kind of talk about in the book with heart attacks is, on the one hand, there's this kind of almost sort of perceived wisdom that's been around in the last few years, that women suffer different symptoms from men, and that's why they're underdiagnosed. That's why they're more likely to be misdiagnosed. And actually, the latest research shows that actually that isn't true. That's a bit of a myth. women are just as likely to experience those kind of classic heart attack symptoms, the chest pains, the pain down the arm,
Mm.
all the sort of things that you think of. And that actually, possibly by having this mindset that women's symptoms are different, maybe that has contributed sort of
Yeah, we
paradoxically,
do see that
you know.
written a lot. So
And what we do know is that symptoms vary from person to person, not necessarily along kind of sex or gender lines. So I
mm,
think it's important, that we're aware of the whole kind of breadth of possible symptoms, that it might be different for one person compared to somebody else. I think the other thing that really stands out when you talk about heart attacks is just the sort of cultural perception of who has heart attacks. If you think
mm,
about heart attacks, the British Heart Foundation talk about the kind of Hollywood heart attack. You can see it, can't you, in your mind? It's like George Clooney or Robert De Niro is clutching their chest, they fall to the floor, everybody comes rushing. And so that is very much what we have in our mind as it's middle-aged men. That's who has heart attack. And that's not true. We know this. We know cardiovascular disease kills more women than breast cancer. But actually, I think for the majority of people on the street, they would think that breast cancer was the biggest thing, as far
yeah.
as women are concerned. And so we need to be talking about this, and I think podcasts like yours talking about the risks that come with the menopause and the fact that women are affected by cardiovascular disease, that women do have heart attacks, is important, because it's not just about doctors stopping and thinking, oh, could this actually be a heart attack? It's also women themselves. One of the big problems is that women tend to present later with heart attack symptoms.
Mm. We don't like to make a
Well, we
fuss
don't like
either,
to
do
make
we? We'll just sit quietly while they deal with everybody
we have
else.
those same cultural stereotypes that make us think, oh, it's not a heart attack. I'm just having a bit of a
Mm,
panic attack or whatever. I think there is very much an issue with the medical side of things, with doctors not going, could this be a heart attack? But also, women ourselves are not aware that it could be an issue. So I think, really raising awareness and being aware of those things is a big part of it. And having those conversations, with your partner. I think often, like you say, you're not necessarily in the middle of a heart attack going to have the presence of mind to say, I think this is a heart attack. Can you please, do the relevant tests or whatever? Can you take this seriously? But if you've had that conversation with your loved ones, your partner, whoever you live with, then they might,
mm.
be the one to think, to say, could this be a heart attack? Should this be something we're looking into?
I'm going to go off on an interesting tangent there because you talk in the book about, and this is kind of slightly irritates me, but also fascinates me, the presence of a male body relative in an appointment with a medical professional, even if they don't say anything, changes the attitude of that kind of doctor, that medical professional.
Yeah, I mean, I would slightly caveat what you just said. It can change the and certainly it's something like you. I feel really uncomfortable saying it sometimes. It's something where I feel like it shouldn't be advice that we have to give to women, but from people that I spoke to, and one woman in particular told me that she had experimented with this. She's someone who lives with a chronic illness, so she has a lot of doctor's appointments, and she'd experimented with going to appointments on her own versus going to appointments with her partner. And she said 9 times out of 10, her partner sat there, he looked at his shoes, didn't say a single word, but the way that she was spoken to was different. And the other thing I would say, is it doesn't necessarily have to be a man. I think often just having somebody else there can make a difference
Yeah.
in and of itself, because whether they're there to advocate for you because you don't feel able to advocate for yourself, but actually, even if they're just there as a witness, as somebody to back you up and say, actually, no, the way that you were spoken to was not on, or just somebody, so that your doctor knows that you're there to be taken seriously, and you've brought somebody and there is somebody else almost kind of holding them to account for the way they treat you. I think that can be really useful. It's not about kind of undermining your doctor or making them feel intimidated,
No.
but it's just saying, I'm here, I've got my moral support, my witness, my advocate, whoever they are, listen to me, take me seriously.
And I think definitely if you are perimenopausal and suffering from the kind of the brain fog, having somebody there to either take notes for you or prompt you if you lost count of the times where I come out of a meeting or not necessarily a kind of an appointment, but you just think, oh God, no, I meant to say that, or I meant to ask about that. So I think,
Yeah.
yeah, as you say, having somebody there.
And actually, even if that's not possible, to make notes beforehand, write stuff down so that you know exactly what you want to say, and you can always kind of check it off as you go through the appointment. That can be really useful. And having symptoms that you've tracked over weeks or months, so you can say, this is how long it's been going on, these are the patterns, these are the things I've noticed, is helpful for your doctor as much as it is for you, because it gives them a clearer picture of what's going on.
I'm terrible for going into things and going, well, I think it happened about 3 months
And
ago.
we all are. We all do it, But I think you have such a short appointment time, and it is a real struggle for GPs as well. I'm very much like, I don't want to slag off GPs. They have a really tough job, and a really tough time of it. And anything you can do to make their job easier is going to benefit you in the long run.
Let's move on to what you call the suicide gender paradox. And so, yeah, for anyone for whom suicide is a tricky topic, feel free to skip ahead on this one or kind of come back if you're not feeling up to listening to it at the moment. So it was news to me that women actually attempt suicide at higher rates, but men are more likely to succeed, to kind of die as a result. So again, the suicide rate for women peaks around the sort of demographic of perimenopause, menopause. Often when we try to point this out, the argument's shut down because obviously the rates are far higher in men than they are in women. But that seems to me to be a really important consideration that, yeah, I don't know the extent to which when we, talk about suicide rates that we take that also into consideration, the sort of, the attempts versus.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the things where, as I say in the book, it's not trying to sort of downplay the seriousness of the male suicide crisis. It is absolutely an issue that men are struggling and are dying by suicide and are not feeling able to ask for help for whatever reason. But I think we also need to look at the fact that there's still a lot of sexism around women's mental health, and I think what we see a lot with suicide attempts, with things like self harm, is this really sort of
Mm,
dismissive language around cries for help or attention seeking. And actually, when you think about the implications of that language, like, why the hell, if someone is feeling that bad that they're hurting themselves, why the hell shouldn't you be paying attention? There's almost this kind of
mm,
implication that if somebody is just attention seeking, that they should be ignored and shut up, and that actually it's not that serious because they haven't gone far enough to actually kill themselves. And that, I think, is such a damaging, it's this whole false economy thing again, isn't it? It's, we only take it seriously once it's too late, and when somebody does actually die by suicide, we have all this hand wringing and, oh, I hope my friends know that you can always reach out and ask for help. But actually, when people do reach out and ask for help, so often the help is not there. And that's what we really need to tackle. We need to make sure that help is available at the earliest possible opportunity, so that we're intervening before it gets to the stage where people feel like there is no other option. That's true across the board with mental health, absolutely. And I think, like you say, there is a real problem around perimenopause where women's mental health is being hit really hard. And it's so easy to dismiss it because, your kids are leaving home, or there's all this other stuff going on in your life. You've got a more responsibility at work, your dynamic with your relationship might have changed. There's all this other stuff that it's easy to kind of write it off as just being this, or
mm.
you hear all these stories about women being told you're just stressed, reduce your hours at work, go for a massage. And actually, we need to be tackling the root causes, and we need doctors to be thinking, could this be hormonal? If a woman of a certain age is coming in and their mental health has just hit rock bottom seemingly out of nowhere, that should be a red flag that something is going on.
Absolutely. And that whole sort of prescribing of antidepressants as a sort of first line treatment rather than hormone therapy, where it would be potentially more appropriate, is a
Yeah.
big thing that I know, the NHS is trying to tackle, but definitely it's something that we kind of hear repeatedly, that women go in for an appointment and the first thing that they're offered is
Yeah,
antidepressants.
absolutely. And I think some of that comes from ignorance, from doctors not joining the gaps, not joining the
Mm.
dots rather, and some of it comes from doctors just really feeling like their hands are tied when it comes to mental health. That waiting lists for specialist services are so long that there's no point referring you for talking therapies because that's going to take 2 years or whatever before you get to speak to somebody.
Looking faster again, isn't it?
Absolutely. So if you also haven't joined the dots and thought this could be menopause and maybe HRT would be a useful option, then yeah,
Mm.
you can see why so many women come out of those appointments with a prescription for antidepressants, because it's an easy option.
I pulled out this quote from page 34, and you're talking in this particular instance about PMDD, which I'm going to get the acronym wrong. Is it? It's you tell me, because otherwise I'll get it wrong. Brain fog.
It's premenstrual dysphoric disorder, so it's a severe form of
Thank you.
PMS.
So the quote says, from a feminist perspective, how do we acknowledge the very real impact of PMDD on sufferers' mental health without fueling the idea that women's menstrual cycles make us irrational, overly emotional, and less competent, trustworthy, or reliable? And again, I think this equally applies to the kind of the situation of perimenopause, menopause, where, especially thinking about it in a workplace context, for example, actually disclosing what might be going on can make us feel very, very vulnerable, because we'll be perceived as less than, not taken seriously, all of that stuff. So yeah, I don't know. I would be really interesting to kind of unpack some of that and kind of hear about your viewpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you say, I think it is a particular problem when it comes to workplaces, because we, as feminists, as working women, have fought for decades, to be seen as equal to men, to sort of dispel these myths and ideas that we're too irrational, we're too emotional, that we're weaker or less capable because of our hormones. That is such a kind of strong cultural message, and you hear still stories about women being dismissed in board meetings as, oh, well, you must be on your period because you're disagreeing with me, or whatever. Women being dismissed as hormonal, with the implication being that they're not thinking straight. So I think it's a really tricky one, and I think workplaces are certainly in recent years having these conversations a lot more about menopause, about menstrual issues, about the impact it has on women at work. And I think it's a really tricky one to know what the solutions are. If you have a kind of blanket menstrual leave policy, menopause leave policy, things like that, I think actually that can in some cases be detrimental, because like you say, it's giving the impression that women are just gonna take a week off work every month, because they've got their period and they want to sit at home and eat chocolate and watch Sex and the City or whatever. That's a really dated example. I don't know why Sex and the City came to mind.
Real housewives of somewhere.
So I think it is really tricky. I think it's a tough one for HR managers to grapple with, and I think there really has to be a much more kind of flexible, human-centered approach, that recognizes that all employees, men, women, everything in between, have different needs. People might have families that mean they have different needs. People might have chronic illnesses. People, might have really severe menopause symptoms. There are all sorts of things going on, and taking a more flexible approach to people as individuals, I guess, is probably the way that I sort of look at it, rather than it being a sort of, because what we don't want is to get back into that kind of mindset of us versus.
Blanket
Yeah,
assumption that
exactly. It just is about listening to what people need, listening to what people are struggling with and what is helpful for them, making allowances for, one of the things that's really difficult if you're working is just getting time off to go to a doctor's appointment, to get the HRT that you might need, or whatever kind of treatment options might help you to function better at work. So I think all those kinds of things, just having a more flexible, open approach to people as individuals is so important.
Obviously, we're recording this. You've kind of already alluded to this sort of earlier on, but a very difficult time for the NHS in the UK. I know we've got listeners from outside the UK as well, but for anybody who isn't aware, there's a lot of strike action going on. The NHS is incredibly underfunded, struggling. We've got record wait times for appointments. We've got ambulances waiting outside hospitals for hours upon end. I have doctors and nurses in my immediate family, so I'm very alive to kind of what is happening. I'm very gratified that you talk in the book about that you're not trying to sort of ascribe blame, and that you do talk about some of the issues that are sort of systemic issues that doctors are having to deal with. You talk as well about the latter part of the book, about the Women's Health Strategy for England, which was published in 2022. I'm going to make a big assumption there, but have you read it all? Do you have any particular thoughts?
Yes, it's a very hefty document. I have been through it, and it do I have thoughts? I mean, yes, I have a lot of I have a lot of thoughts.
Publishable or audible?
I think at a sort of fundamental level, I think the fact that it has been published, the fact that this conversation is happening at a government and policy level, is really positive and is a testament to the hard work of campaigners and advocates like the ones in the book. I think they really are the people who have laid the groundwork for getting this conversation on the agenda. And so I think the fact that the government has been forced to listen, has been forced to run a public consultation on this to address the issues, is hugely significant, and that we can't underestimate how significant the publication of the Women's Health Strategy is. There are some really good things in it. Dame Leslie Regan has been appointed as the Women's Health Ambassador. I think she is fantastic. I think she will be really a formidable person to have in our corner, kind of holding the government to account. And there are lots of promising things in the Women's Health Strategy. It's very comprehensive in the areas that it covers, which is great to see. I think the concerns that I and other people have raised are around a kind of lack of specific details. So a lot of it feels quite vague. It feels like the actual sort of finer points have not yet been nailed down, and that will be important.
No kind of deadlines and no specifics.
Absolutely, yeah. And then the other thing, of course, as we again have already talked about, is there is no really specific dedicated funding allocated. There are kind of certain small pots for specific projects, but there are big questions about where all of the money is going to come from to fund the things that are talked about in the strategy. And I think at an even bigger, more fundamental level, there is no real reference to a workforce plan, and that is the crisis that the NHS currently finds itself in. We do not have enough doctors and nurses for the NHS to function properly. We need people to put this strategy into practice. And if there's nobody left to run the GP practices, it could be the best strategy in the world, but there'd be no one to put it into practice. And that, I think, is the really key thing for me, is that we need the funding, we need the resources, we need the government to look seriously at workplace, at staff retention, at recruitment, because otherwise it's all meaningless. It will not achieve what it is setting out to achieve, and that's what we really need to see happening over the coming months and years.
Yeah, I mean, it's taken a long time for the NHS to get to this critical point that it's at now. It's going to take a long time. It's going to be a long road back.
Absolutely.
Hopefully, come back. That seems like a good a place as any to wind things up. Sarah, thank you so much. Rebel Bodies is out. I really, really couldn't recommend it to you more highly. I think it's a really, really important work. Congratulations on your book, baby, your real baby, and yeah, look forward to reading more of your work. I'll make sure that we link to the book, to your social media accounts, and to the Hysterical Women blog as well in the show notes. But yeah, thank you so much for your
Thank
time.
you.
You've been listening to the Middling Along podcast. Do remember to subscribe to be notified when our next episode is live. And why not visit the blog at www.middlingalong.com to sign up to my newsletter as well. I do hope you enjoyed listening today. If you did, I'd be really grateful if you would consider leaving a short review, as that helps people find the podcast and helps get it noticed. Hope you can join us next time. Goodbye for now.